Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is John Black. John, welcome.
Thank you, Gavin.
Now, we've had our little talk beforehand, and you've been involved in education for quite some time.
That's right. I'm one of the religious instructors in the government schools in Melbourne, and I've been a religious instructor for about 20 years altogether, and I find it is very rewarding having that privilege to go into the government schools during school hours to provide religious instruction.
And at the moment we're recording out of a little studio in Burwood. You know a little bit of the history, so would you like to tell us about this space we're in?
Well, this studio is in a house called Benedict House, which is in St Benedict's Parish in Burwood, which is along Warrigal Road. So when people travel along Warrigal Road, it's a real landmark that they can see. But St Benedict's Parish has been here for a very long time, Gavin, and of course Burwood is a very established suburb. Burwood was probably established about 160 years ago, and so it's seen as one of those very homely, well-known suburbs on this side of Melbourne. And I believe that some of the buildings along here used to have religious sisters, and these days, of course, there are brothers living in some of the buildings here in this parish, the missionaries of God's love.
Now, your education experience has gone across a lot of suburbs when you were a paid teacher. How broad as far as geographic was that teaching experience?
Well, as a paid school teacher, I've travelled to various suburbs in different directions around Melbourne. So I've taught over in the west. I've travelled over, the Westgate Bridge to get to those suburbs like Point Cook, and I've taught in some suburbs in the north as well as out in the east, and some suburbs down in the south. So you can find that when you're working in a job like school teaching, you do get to see quite a range of different suburbs. So certainly that's been the case for me in my role as a paid school teacher. But as a religious instructor in the government schools, I'm a volunteer.
Okay, one of the comments about some of our new suburbs were the developer suburbs, and we mentioned one of those, which was
Point Cook.
Point Cook. I hadn't thought of it as that kind of a suburb, a developer suburb, but of course that's how the progress is taking place. Developers come in and change the landscape and make a pocket full of dollars at the same time.
Melbourne is growing all the time, of course. We know that the population of Melbourne is over 4 million, and new suburbs are being established each year, and you would have seen new houses going up in various suburbs like Point Cook and so on. And yes. So Melbourne is expanding, it's getting bigger, and I suppose that means that there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, in terms of providing education and various other services too, you've got to think of transport and healthcare, hospitals, and so on and so on.
Yes. So now coming back to religious instruction in the schools, how have you found yourself being received?
Well, my experience has been very positive. In the state of Victoria, the religious instruction is provided for by the Victorian Education and Training Act. The Act allows lessons of 30 minutes once per week in the government primary schools in Victoria. And normally those religious instructors who provide those lessons are volunteers like me. If there's enough call for it say in a local community, it usually gets provided. And because that call for it is there, you tend to find that the response is rather good.
Well, that's a very positive approach. It would seem that there's a groundswell of support, not often vocalised, but it's there.
Yes, well, you do find from experience that there are so many people out there who are quietly supportive towards that program, whereby the religious instructors go into the government schools during school hours. But I suppose people don't tend to go around making a big, splash about it. But the support is certainly there. But we need more people to express their support, to actually talk to other people about it, or say to write letters to politicians in support of the program,
yes,
and so on and so on. So there are so many different ways people can show their support.
I think one of the topics that we were looking at was the moral imperative, and how religious instruction puts out there some good living standards, some good values, and often that's what it's based on, presenting good values to young people at in an informative way.
The religious instruction program is designed to provide values for young people to think about. So the program is really worthwhile. It provides a framework for young people's lives, and it gives them that extra knowledge and perspective, which are really, really vital and valuable.
John, thank you for that. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is John Black. John, we touched on the geography of your experience as a teacher right across the various suburbs of Melbourne, according to the points of the compass, and the valuable contribution for our young people is religious instruction. Now, winding the clock back a little bit, you went to Monash University.
Yes, I studied economics at Monash in the 1970s, Gavin.
And how was it back then?
Well, that era, I suppose, was quite a fun, laid-back era. I think it's more serious in the universities now.
Yes.
But, it was a good era, and back then, usually on completing their courses, the graduates could get a job reasonably quickly. But it does tend to be harder now.
Yes, yes. So what have you found the support within the school system as a religious instructor? Principals' responses, and how's that been going?
There is a good deal of support there in the government school communities. And certainly the program is so worthwhile. It's really, really worth continuing with, in the government schools.
Now, you've spent a large proportion of your life in Ashburton.
Yes, that's right, Gavin.
So how many years?
I've lived all my life in Ashburton.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you would have had to have found your own mode of transport across to the western suburbs or the northern suburbs, or wherever you were teaching as a paid position?
Yes, that's right. Yes, well, yeah, I've been a car driver for many, many years. Yes, so I've certainly made use of my car.
Yes, and as we were discussing before, you certainly have seen the changes in the different suburbs as they've sprung up and developed.
Yes, well, travelling around Melbourne, you really do track the changes over a period of years.
Yes.
So Melbourne certainly has become a rather large, busy city, and more and more infrastructure is being built every year. And of course, as I mentioned before, education is something that is needed in the developing suburbs, outer suburbs, yes, and growing suburbs, and so on and so on. So it is something that really needs to be focused on. So of course, education has so many different aspects.
And the composition of classes, as far as attendees goes, would have changed a little over the years. What did you notice there?
Well, I find that Melbourne has become more multicultural, so certainly that's something that people like me have observed, thinking back to the 1970s and 1980s. So we've found that migrants have added so much to our country. Yes. So really, it's a great experience, having the chance to meet so many migrants.
So in some of the RI classes that you've taught, have they been blended classes from different cultural backgrounds?
Yes, certainly. It depends on the suburb, but certainly some suburbs are so multicultural that you're going to come across children in classes who have parents and grandparents, from so many different countries of the world.
So, the world is our doorstep rather than us having to fly somewhere or travel long distances to embrace other cultures and other diversities.
Yes, well, when you meet people from other countries and various different cultures, and you interact with people from so many different backgrounds, it does make life very interesting. And as you said, in a way it is putting the world on our doorstep. So really our experience here in Australia is quite unique when, yes, you consider the wonderful role that immigration has played and how our country Australia has evolved. It's really still the lucky country in so many ways.
So the Judeo-Christian values have played an important role as to what our country is shaped and what it looks like. Would you like to comment on that for a moment?
Yes, certainly, Gavin. Australia has got a wonderful Christian heritage, and of course Christianity came from Judaism, so we've got that wonderful heritage all the time, and I don't think we should really ignore that heritage. I think Australians should be proud of the Jewish and Christian heritage that we've got, and the religious instruction provided by the people who belong to those faiths is a wonderful thing in the schools here.
I've noticed as I've talked to others that sometimes the respect, the hope that's added into the classroom, or certainly through the children that attend RI classes, is measurable, but only over a period of time.
Well, you can find that the fruits of what is provided can be very, very hard to measure, and the fruits may emerge years later, but the religious instruction is providing values, and it's providing knowledge, and it's providing a framework for young people's lives. So in all those ways, it's really, really helpful for young people.
Thank you, John. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest today is John Black. Well, John, we've covered quite a spectrum here
Yes.
of your experience. Religious instruction, does that embrace other faiths?
Yes, there are other faiths as well as Judaism and Christianity providing religious instruction in the government schools in Victoria. So if there's enough call for it on a local level, it is provided.
And that's in the Act?
Yes, that's provided for in the Victorian Education and Training Act. So the religious instruction in the government schools in Victoria is not exclusively the domain of Judaism and Christianity.
Okay. Now, coming back to those who are supportive, we call them the quiet ones. Let's talk about that for a moment.
Well, yeah, as I mentioned earlier on, I find there are so many people who are quietly supportive towards that program of religious instruction in the government schools in Victoria during school hours, but we need people to express their support, and there are so many different ways they can express it.
And some of those ways could be?
Well, people can talk to other people on a local level, say at a local church, for example, or at a local school about the program. They can find out more about the program if they need to. And also, if someone has an interest in becoming a religious instructor, they can inquire, say, to someone like a minister of religion, or they could talk to someone, say, in a local school community about how one could possibly become a religious instructor.
So when you first began, what were the processes involved 20 years ago?
So when I started off, it was done through the local parish where I lived.
And today there's a more structured process to become involved?
It's probably slightly more structured now than it was back in those days, but the basics are still there. So normally the people who go into the government schools as religious instructors are sent by the local churches.
Okay. Now, again, your paid teaching experience would have stood you in good stead as you've tackled the challenges in the classroom. What are some of the most memorable moments that you've had?
Well, I think teaching can be a very rewarding experience, but of course teaching has its challenges, as you mentioned. But I think it's a great experience when you get the chance to meet so many different people, and if you can make a positive difference in the lives of young people, it can be very, very rewarding.
And can you recall some of those moments, maybe with students or even teachers, during the 20 years that you've been teaching?
Well, it is certainly very pleasing when you get the positive feedback. So, say the people say, well, you know, you really helped me learn such and such, or, you know, you've gave me a lot of encouragement. So I think it's a great aspect of, you know, your role as a person, you know, in the schools when you have that type of feedback from people.
Now, the school support, they have an observer in the classroom?
Well, the way it works with the religious instruction program in the government schools in Victoria is that the religious instructors are usually volunteers. I'm a volunteer as a religious instructor, and there is a requirement that a qualified school teacher who is working at the school supervises. So they are there at the same time that the religious instruction is going on. Of course, one has to keep in mind that the lessons only go for 30 minutes. So the Victorian Education and Training Act provides for those lessons to occur once a week for 30 minutes.
So the good side of this is that parents are requested to fill in the notification letter that goes out. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, the state government does have a process in place whereby parental consent is required in order for the youngsters to receive religious instruction. So the schools do send something home and the parents can put ticks in the right places and they have to sign the form and it has to go back to the school, and then the staff at the school have to process it. So certainly the procedures involve the parents giving permission so that way they know that their child is receiving religious instruction, and the parent, of course, can nominate which form of religious instruction that their child can receive. If the school, say, has more than one version, and some schools do have quite a number of different versions of religious instruction, so they've got a choice there.
Well, I think it's good that there's a working relationship between those who want to impart these values to students, that the schools are open, the education department's open, and there's a process by which everything's covered correctly.
That's right. So certainly you've got the formal frameworks in place, and certainly there are procedures that have to be followed, and the religious instructors have got to conform with a whole set of requirements, but certainly that's all part of the deal, and the program is operating very successfully, and I've found it so rewarding, and it's really wonderful when you've got that opportunity to make such a positive difference in the lives of young people.
John Black, thank you for your time. You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us next week. Goodbye.